The idea of a new manager bounce is one of the most widely accepted beliefs in football. When a team is struggling, the instinct to change manager feels almost obvious. Poor results must mean poor tactics, poor leadership, or an inability to motivate and inspire the players. So bring in someone new and performances should improve. And that's exactly why clubs make the change. The expectation is simple. A fresh face with better ideas should lead to an immediate upturn in results. But it's not just about getting in a better tactician. A managerial change can shift the entire psychology of a club. Players may feel reinvigorated by the chance for a clean slate under a new manager. The negativity amongst fans is replaced by renewed hope and optimism. And even the tone of the media coverage can shift, easing the pressure surrounding the club. So from every angle, a new manager feels like it should create a short-term lift. And in modern Premier League football, where avoiding relegation is worth huge sums of money to the club, that short-term boost can be everything. This logic has underpinned Tottenham Hotspurs' appointments of Igor Tudor and now Roberto De Zerbi, a bid to secure a bounce that could help stave off what would be an existential threat to the club's future. But is it really that simple? Does the data actually support the idea of a new manager bounce? Now, of course, there are plenty of real-world examples that seem to confirm this idea. Take, for example, Chelsea in the 2021 Premier League season. After a 2-0 defeat to Leicester City, the team sat in 9th place, hugely underperforming relative to the expectations that the club had. Having seen enough of the team's performances, the club made the call. Frank Lampard was out, and Thomas Tuchel was appointed as his successor. What followed was the textbook definition of a new manager bounce. Chelsea ended up finishing 4th in the Premier League, and also went on to major trophy success, winning the UEFA Champions League. Examples like this and many others certainly breathe life into the reality of the new manager bounce. However, according to psychological theory and data of managerial changes, the reality is actually a lot more complicated than it first appears. Researchers studying managerial changes in sports such as football and Major League Baseball have generally pointed to 3 main theories that try to explain what actually happens when a manager is replaced. The first idea is the common sense view. This is the idea that most fans and media pundits instinctively believe. If a team is underperforming, it must be the manager. Maybe the tactics aren't working, maybe the in-game decisions are poor, or maybe the players just aren't motivated. So replace them with someone better and performances should improve. Assuming the club identify a stronger coach who can implement a stronger system and boost team confidence, results should therefore pick up. And really, this is the logic that underpins the whole idea of a new manager bounce. It's intuitive and it's appealing, and it's why fans, pundits and clubs so often expect an immediate turnaround. The second view, however, is much less optimistic regarding a new manager bounce. While it accepts that managers matter, and that a new manager could be better than the last, it argues that changing them doesn't automatically lead to an improvement in performance. In fact, it might actually do the opposite. Because any managerial change is disruptive. A new manager brings a new system, new coaches, new ideas, and even a different culture around the squad, and all of that takes time to bed in. So instead of an immediate improvement, performances can actually get worse. In some cases, this can potentially lead clubs falling into a vicious cycle, constantly chasing that new manager bounce, sacking one manager after another when it fails to appear, and with each change creating more instability, not less. From this perspective, the decision whether to change managers becomes a trade-off. Yes, a new manager might in theory be better than the last, but that potential upside has to be weighed against the very real short-term disruption. And overall, this view therefore suggests that a new manager bounce isn't guaranteed. In fact, in the short term, it may be more likely that performance declines, rather than improves. The final view is perhaps the most skeptical of them all. It argues that a new manager bounce depends on a much more fundamental question. Was the manager actually the problem in the first place? Because often, poor performances can have other causes. It could be the lack of the quality in the squad due to a result of poor recruitment, an injury crisis, a tough run of fixtures, or even sometimes just bad luck. But ultimately, when performances don't live up to expectations, the pressure builds. Fans demand answers, the media looks for someone to blame, and the manager becomes the easiest target and can become the scapegoat. So the club makes a change in order to appear to be taking action, but it doesn't actually address the underlying issues. If the root problem hasn't been fixed, then why would performances improve? Okay, so while a new manager bounce could in theory happen, these perspectives suggest that it should also not be taken for granted. But what does the data regarding the effects of managerial change on team performance actually say? Well, perhaps one of the most influential studies on this comes from Richard Ordas, Stephen Dobson and John Goddard. They analysed the effects of managerial changes in the English football leagues over 21 seasons, spanning from 1972 to 1993. And at first glance, the results seem to support the idea of a new manager bounce. Teams that change manager did see an improved performance afterwards. A recent BBC article has also pointed out this same effect. 18 of the last 30 Premier League appointments have bettered their team's points tally in their first 5 league games in charge compared to the previous 5 under the previous manager, while only 9 managers showed a decline in performance. However, such data tells a very skewed and incomplete story as to what's really going on here. For instance, Ordas, Dobson and Goddard's data also revealed a curious effect. When they looked at teams who went through identical poor runs of form, but didn't change their manager, they found almost the exact same recovery in performance. In fact, if anything, those teams improved slightly more. These findings highlight something crucial about the supposed new manager bounce. As fans and pundits, we often see an upturn in performance after a managerial change and immediately assume it's the result of the new manager. It feels like proof of the bounce and reinforces the conventional belief. But in reality, these bounces are often illusory. They're not caused by the incoming manager at all. This is because clubs usually change managers when the team is at its lowest point. And poor form doesn't last forever. Even without a change, we would expect performance to improve naturally over time, a phenomenon known as regression to the mean. And if anything, a managerial change can sometimes slow and hinder this natural recovery. Teams might have actually been better off sticking with the manager they already had. These patterns have been found across different leagues and also other sports. When researchers compare teams that change managers with those that didn't, there's little evidence of any real improvement. In many cases, performance is actually worse after the change. And when you zoom out further, the picture becomes even clearer. Studies that track performance over both the short and long term suggest while there may be a brief uptick in results after a managerial change, it rarely lasts. Over time, performances tend to decline again, or even get worse, as the underlying issues re-emerge. So these so-called bounces are often temporary, and often very likely illusory, rather than a sign of genuine, sustained improvement. What these studies really reflect, therefore, are the more pessimistic views of scapegoating and vicious cycles. The new manager bounce may be somewhat of a myth. As one researcher summarised, considering the empirical results, firing a coach occurs too often. Since it's not clear that the results on the field improve after a change of coach, it's likely that the board of a team intervenes for other reasons. It's likely that the fan and media pressure are also strong determinants of the tenure of a coach. So, returning back to Tottenham Hotspur, who have just appointed Roberto De Zerbi with 7 games left in the season, in a desperate bid to avoid what would be a catastrophic relegation from the Premier League. Will this managerial change save their season? Well, evidence suggests there might be a short-term uptick in performance, but if it happens, this might just be a statistical artifact. After a prolonged period of poor form, some improvement is inevitable, whether or not De Zerbi is at the helm. Of course, whether such an uptick in performance reflects a real new manager bounce or simply regression to the mean, I'm sure Spurs fans won't care, as long as it keeps them in the Premier League. But if Spurs do manage to avoid relegation, there's an important lesson for both the fans and the club. Changing your manager isn't always the solution. Since their high point of reaching the UEFA Champions League final in 2019, Spurs have had 7 permanent managers and a host of interim appointments, with an average tenure of just 9 months. The constant change of managers may reflect scapegoating that seeks to avoid accepting the deeper issues at the club, and moreover may in fact be highly destabilising, creating a vicious cycle that contributes to the club's downward spiral, rather than addressing it. To add insult to injury for Spurs fans, a useful counterpoint can be found just across North London at Arsenal. When Mikel Arteta was appointed as manager, his tenure did not immediately yield success. The club endured 2 8th-place finishes, and many fans questioned whether a manager with no prior top-level experience was really the right person to take the club to success. At that point, the Arsenal board faced a dilemma familiar to so many other clubs: stick with a long-term project, or pursue a managerial change. However, the club chose persistence, and that decision has clearly paid off. Under Arteta, Arsenal now enjoy a clear tactical identity, a coherent recruitment strategy, and a stable organisational culture. This faith in a long-term vision has brought them to the brink of Premier League success, a feat that has eluded them for 22 years. Had Arsenal opted for the alternative path of frequent managerial changes, they might well have fallen into the same cycle of instability that now plagues Spurs. So for Tottenham, the real challenge isn't simply finding the next manager to give them that bounce. It's deciding whether they're ready to stop chasing one altogether. But in a sport that so often prioritises immediate results, that may be the most difficult decision of them all.